podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching TV or the news, social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. So today we have a slightly different subject, actually. We are going to talk about relationships and the menopause. And to do so, we have Louise Bowditch. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sophie.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm excited.
That's okay.
Chat about stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because obviously I know you, but other people may not.
Okay, so hello, my name is Louise Bowditch and I am a menopause mentor and a midlife coach. And I help women master the menopause mindset, I think is a fair description of what I do. And I also like to call myself a fixer of midlife muddles, because it can be a tricky time, and I'm on a mission to help women travel this hormonal roller coaster with as little grief as possible, basically, and to try and actually help them come out the other end still feeling like the same person they were before they went in, but better.
And I think that's a very fair point, because relationships can be difficult at any point and at the best of times. So obviously throw in the menopause, and that's a bit more of a challenge, isn't it?
Slightly, yes. Challenge is a really good word, I think, because there's a lot of misconceptions about it out in society. And one of the reasons why one of the reasons I do what I do is because I want to be the person I needed about 4 or 5 years ago. And there isn't enough information out there. The women who are going through the menopause don't even like to talk about it. Society doesn't like to talk about it. Men certainly don't like to talk about it. And I would like to sort of revolutionize the way that women experience the menopause.
Yeah, and I think it's a very fair point. Now, for medical reasons, I had the menopause induced last year. And because of my age, and because I actually look even younger than I actually am, I found it very difficult, because people would look at you quite literally weird. And when I said, oh, it's okay, it's a hot flush, I've got the menopause. Come on, love, you can't be having the menopause. And actually I was, and it was really hard, because I then had to kind of explain myself. Obviously it was for medical reasons, but I also know people who are going through it like mid-30s. So can you enlighten us about that and why maybe people find it so difficult?
Well, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head when you said that people turn around and said, oh, don't be ridiculous, you can't be having a hot flush. And I think that attitude is really down to the fact that it's not spoken about enough. So I can remember, my own personal experience of having the occasional sort of hot flush. I don't know, people call them hot flush, power surges, personal summer, all these crazy terms. And I think I was probably feeling myself that I was too young to be having these hot flushes, in linking it to the menopause or the perimenopause. And the perimenopause is the period of time that leads up to a single day, really. So all of these symptoms and effects of the menopause that we have are normally during the perimenopause phase of this sort of hormonal journey that we go on. And I don't think there is enough information out there. So people have the wrong information, they have misinformation, bit of fake news, really. I think that's probably what you could call it.
Yeah.
And we just don't talk about it. And I know that even the women, I think I said this earlier, the women who are going through it, they also don't really like to talk about it. It could be a generational thing. I'm wondering if we're my age, I'm 51, and I'm wondering if I'm one of the very first of a generation to start going,
a bit more open, yeah.
Definitely. We want to be open. We want to talk about it. I want to show women that you can actually come through this stage with a positive mindset, with a positive view, and it can be empowering, it can be liberating. And, menopause has really got a bad name. I think it needs rebranding, and I am going to be one of the women who do that for future generations as well as my own.
And I think, as we're talking, I remember one particular episode, for one of the better terms, where last year there was a lot of snow and I couldn't actually get the car out. So I walked to the supermarket, and I walked in, I had a coat on, but I had a T-shirt underneath. I could have walked in the T-shirt, it was that hot, to be fair. And when I got there, I just couldn't bear the heating as soon as I got into the supermarket. So I started taking my coat off, and I go around, and there's people with gloves and hats and whatever, and I'm in a T-shirt fanning myself. And in the end, I went to the freezer area just to kind of just jump in, pretty much, just try and cool down. And people who've not experienced that don't get it at all.
No, they don't. The hot flush is probably one of the most recognisable effects of the menopause. You can probably most people know that that's one of the major issues, and for me personally, it's been a bit of a nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
But no one, unless they have experienced it, I can think really appreciate how uncomfortable it is, and how, I don't know, how you feel like everybody knows. You feel that your skin is flushing, you can have the sweats, you feel quite vulnerable. And I think this is why in relationships, it's really important for the people around you to know that it's not just a physical thing that's happening to you. It is a psychological, emotional change in your being that has a really, really big impact. It can affect your confidence. It can affect how you see yourself, your purpose in life. You question everything, including relationships.
And is that what you think women need to understand about what they're going through?
Definitely. It's definitely realizing that as well as those physical changes they will go through, of which there are there's lots of different advice out there for what you can do for the physical elements of the menopause or the perimenopause. I believe there is far less information about how changing your mindset, changing your attitude, and the psychological effects, and how you can cope with those changes. I believe there's far less out there.
And interesting you should say that. So because mine was medically induced, it was 1 minute I was normal, the next minute I'd had an injection with literally enough to get me going for 28 days, so a complete rush of hormones. And it's true that from the next morning, this was in the evening they did it, from the next morning I pretty much wanted to kill just about anyone, because it was so sudden. So it took some while obviously to get used to, because it was so quick. But in my particular case, I use some herbal supplements, and also what I do as a job, which is neurolinguistic programming. But what would you say a woman should do to help herself? What else is there that can be done?
Okay, so I'm just going to give, 5 tips here for a non-medical, or how I see the best way for you to help yourself in a non-medical way. Right. I'm not a medical practitioner, and there are doctors and practitioners out there who have obviously at their disposal more medical intervention, etc., and treatments. I'm going to talk about what we can do as individuals who are struggling with coming to terms with what's happening to their body and are really sort of suffering across the board psychologically and physically. So my top tip, if you like, if you can only manage one thing, I would say it is stress management, believe it or not. So what happens as our hormonal sort of makeup changes as we're starting to go through the menopause or the perimenopause, our coping mechanisms for stress tend to get put to the side. They're not as efficient as they used to be. So you have a lot of cortisol coursing through your veins. That is the stress hormone, and that can actually make dealing with everything else that you're going through so much more difficult. So my top tip, if you like, if you only manage one thing, would be stress management. And obviously I'm able to help women find out what their stressors are and how they can avoid those or adapt those, etc. So I would say stress management is number one. Number two, nutrition and exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a bore. It's always on a top tip list, but that's because it works, and that's because it has a huge impact on us. You know, what we put into our body and how we kind of and move our body really does affect how we can our general well-being.
And I think for me, one of the things that it said was to avoid spicy food and alcohol, and it is true that it did not help if I had spicy food or alcohol at all. Yes. It made it worse. There's no doubt about that.
Yes, another one, particularly for hot flushes. Yes, it's reduce your intake of alcohol. Avoid spicy foods, and also reduce your caffeine intake. Caffeine is a stimulant, and it can really kind of knock your internal thermometer out of whack slightly. And I think also, and it's about finding what works for you, because there's no point you doing something sort of 100% against your will, because it's not going to have the beneficial effects. It's about finding a way to fuel your body with nutritious food, avoiding the processed stuff that's out there, eating more whole foods if you can. And with exercise, it's about finding something that works for you, that you can do, that you enjoy it, and you have a much, much better chance of maintaining
and keeping at it.
Maintaining an exercise routine or just a nutritional plan if you enjoy it, and if you don't feel as though it's a punishment. And ditch the diet. Most definitely ditch the diet. Weight gain is a classic effect of the perimenopause, and dieting, which is a whole other subject, really does not help you at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would say knowledge. Find out what you can, and do what you can to help yourself understand what's going through, because I believe knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. And I also believe, through my own personal experience as well, that if you understand the physical effects of what is happening to your body, or what your body is actually going through, then it helps you to understand why you might be feeling a certain way, why your body might be doing something that it hasn't done before. And I think it's really empowering to have some understanding of how your body is reacting because of the hormonal changes going through.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that you take action. So you go off and you do a little bit of research. You find out some methods, coping mechanisms, strategies to help you go through a particularly challenging period. And then you take little steps, little action steps. We are hardwired to run for the hills if we get too much change too soon. We want to go straight back to our previous behaviours. So we need to trick our brains a little bit just to take a little step every day. And if that's starting with perhaps stress management, you have to find a way that you can do something a little bit every day to help you manage a situation better. And then it's taking action, which brings with it a confidence. You have a little bit more control over how you're feeling and what you're doing.
So that's obviously for the woman going through it. What would you suggest people around that woman should do, not just to help her, but also to help themselves? Because, it's one of those, isn't it? I know that when you are menopausal, your triggers are a little bit more raw, for want of a better word. But the people around you need to know that, understand that, and probably try and help not to trigger those so often.
That leads really nicely to the fifth point that I was...
sorry.
No. That leads straight on to the fifth point, which is great, and it's talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about it to those around you. Talk about it. If you talk about it to friends and family, what you find is that you will get support. You will get understanding. You will get people making, changing, perhaps, like you say, something that they do that all of a sudden becomes really difficult for you to cope with. And if you talk about it, that it's out there, you're not suffering in silence. And this is what I found talking to other women, is that they feel that they have to suffer in silence. They feel they just got to keep their mouth shut. And it's 2018, for goodness sake. We don't have to behave like some Victorian woman sat in a parlour while the men are out there doing all the wonderful things and the women are just being quiet and at home.
But did you not find, because I know that for me at the beginning, despite the fact I knew this was happening, because obviously, as I said, I was injected with it, I didn't realise that I was so necessarily jumpy. I just thought I was having a conversation. And one day, one of my best friends said to me, just so you know, he says, you've always been quite argumentative, but you are pushing it to new levels. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm glad you said that, actually, because I just thought I was having a nice conversation here, but clearly I was maybe a bit aggressive.
I actually think what happens, I mean, I can't comment on individual situations, but I do think what happens is that our bullshit radar.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I think we, all of a sudden, get fed up with some of the nonsense perhaps that we've been much more happily able to push to one side, to ignore, to let it go, to not let it bother us. As we go through this hormonal shift, there is actually a sort of a physiological shift that happens. So the estrogen and progesterone, those sort of reproductive hormones that are diminishing through the perimenopause, they trigger, or they have been responsible, I should say, previously for sort of the mothering, nurturing, caring aspect of putting others before you put yourself. As you go through and into the perimenopause, that shifts. All of a sudden, your body is not telling you that you have to be this mothering kind of woman, this person that everyone goes to with all their problems, because you're moving out of the motherhood phase. Whether you have children or not, this will happen to you whether you have children or not, this shift of hormones. So I actually think your bullshit radar is like far more sensitive, and you're like, you know what, I'm done with this. I don't have to put up with this. All of a sudden decide that you and your feelings and emotions are important too. And therefore other people's, if you don't like it, you decide, actually, no, I'm not going to put up with this nonsense anymore.
And one of the things I was going to say is obviously is the importance of communication. So, mentioning to people that you are potentially going through a bit of a change and that, you're struggling. But I think in terms of, if we call it an intimate relationship, I think that the other person does need to make a bit of an effort to understand and to look after you, because it's not a pleasant experience. I mean, there were times where I was trying to get out of my own way.
Yes, I think having an understanding partner is probably one of the most emotionally supportive things that you can, ask for. And I know that I think if your partner is of a similar age and is a woman, there are going to be overlaps. I mean, yes, that will cause fireworks. If you're both having a day on the same time at the same time, then it will cause fireworks. However, what I would say is another woman would probably be more empathetic if they are experiencing the same thing as their partner. For a man, however, I don't actually think there is anything that you can liken it to. And so I explained to my husband, I was trying to explain to my husband in a really raw and emotional way so he could feel it. And I asked him to remember what it was like when he was a teenager. I said, do you remember when you were a teenager? And he was like, yes. I said, okay. Do you remember when you were a teenager and you thought the whole world was out to get you? You thought that everyone was trying to ruin your life, that you felt that no one understood you. And I sort of listed these feelings that I can remember from my own teenage, sort of, all those years ago. And he kind of had this look on his face. I said, okay, so you know how you felt? Yes. He said, yes, I can remember. I said, okay, so that was due to the hormones rushing in and coursing through your veins. I said, and those hormones, you were experiencing all these thoughts and feelings and behaviours perhaps that you hadn't had any idea that were there, and all of a sudden they're out. Everyone's out to get you. You know, your life is a mess. I said, this is how I have felt going through the perimenopause and as a woman at this stage of my life. I said, except for my hormones aren't coming and rushing in and coursing through my veins. My hormones are falling off a cliff. My hormones are lemming-like in their behaviour. They are going off that cliff and they are hurling themselves off. And I feel the same way. I feel like no one understands me. No one knows what I'm going through. Everyone's out to get me, etc., etc. And when I explained it like that to him, this look of, I don't know, astonishment, pain, relief, etc., was quite amazing. And I actually genuinely feel for any woman out there looking to tell a partner, a male partner, or perhaps a work colleague, or just men in general, who, you know, however, their sons perhaps, that's a really, really effective way of trying to get them to have some empathy as to what you're going through.
And funny enough, talking about men, now I'm not saying this from a scientific background in any way, shape or form, but I've worked with men enough and for long enough and in close proximity enough to have noticed this. But I personally think they also go through a period very different to ours, you know, probably no physical signs that we would have, but every 6 to 8 weeks they go really quiet for a couple of days, get in their cave, don't want to know anything. And what I've noticed in older men is that I generally believe that they also go through their own kind of menopause, because after all, if the hormones came in the same way that you've just described as a teenager, there's a point where we've got to kind of come out.
Yes, I don't know whether you would call it menopause, because the word
menopause, but you know what I mean.
Even though it can, because this is interesting, and I always thought this, I was thinking, why the hell are they called it menopause? You know, why have they included the word men in menopause? This is outrageous. Actually, I found out that it's actually meno, so it's the first 4 letters of the word meno, meno, which mean menses, a month.
Okay.
Sorry, month. And the word pause is obviously pauses, which means stop.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing to do with men, which I was quite relieved about. However, there are some people out there who believe that men go through something called the andropause, which is, I guess, a shift of hormones. I don't know enough about it. I think perhaps, though, that if a woman is feeling the effects of the perimenopause and her husband or partner, lover, whoever, talks about feeling in a similar way with low mood, etc., perhaps that's exactly what's happening. I think they call it testosterone deficiency.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a term, you know, I've not really researched it, it's just my own observations a lot of the time. And I think, as you've just said, you know, people are probably a lot more open about the menopause nowadays. But what else do you think could be done to generate better understanding? And that's for all parties involved, men and women.
Well, I would question whether it's more openly spoken about. I think in a particular space of time, a period of time, pun intended, that is allowing us to talk about it. There are other things in society that are happening with the Me Too campaign and, you know, No Says No, and all of these sort of women's liberation and empowerment movements that are going on globally, I think, obviously particularly in developed countries, where women are being able to talk about the things that are affecting them, whereas in the past they've had to keep a lid on it, really. So it definitely is about talking about it. It's about demystifying it. It's also about, like I said earlier, giving it a bit of a rebrand, because I personally am here starting a business because of the menopause, because I wanted someone to help me and there wasn't anybody. So I would like to be that person for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And B, because it's given me a whole new outlook on life, which is a positive. It's a positive one. The physical symptoms or effects of the menopause are rubbish. The psychological ones aren't talked about and are probably more difficult to deal with. However, at the end of that, if you can come through it, if you can get your mindset in the right place and you can come through it or can get a handle on it, then I actually think it can be a positive experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I've got to say, my original thought when they said to me, we're going to do induce for menopause, because obviously it was medical, it was for a time. I was kept in a state, but then obviously I've come out of it. Although some would argue I'm just about coming out of it now. But I was dreading. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to go through this again. I just can't bear the thought, you know?
Yes, and I would say to you that perhaps next time you will be in a better place. You'll have more knowledge. You'll have more information. Hopefully,
I think it does depend on how. If it happens naturally, I think I'll be fine. If it does happen as a result of a total hysterectomy, which is a possibility, I won't be so fine because it would be just a squick sort of thing. But I think, you know, I've gone through it once. I'm sure I can do it again. I didn't die the first time round. I probably learned from it quite a bit. But what would you say would be your best tip for a woman? Just about, or questioning, or I think it's starting, I'm not sure. What would be your best tip?
There are 34. There's a long list of 34 symptoms, if you like. I don't like to use the word symptom because the menopause or perimenopause is not a disease.
It's not, but it's a word that's recognised by most, which is why
I try and like to say the effects of the menopause, but you can't always use that in the right context. So there's a list of 34 symptoms, which are far-ranging, and there will be physical and psychological items on there that you perhaps would need to have to check.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the GP. You can go to the GP. Whether they will offer you a blood test, a blood screening or not, I don't know. I don't know what. I was very lucky. I was very lucky. I had a GP who said, "Yep, let's get you tested for this." Although she tried to have me in the perimenopause since I was about 39, I think.
Right.
Although it can start as early as 35. But by the by, if you feel that you have perhaps 3 to 5 of the long list of symptoms, then I think maybe, you know, it's something that you should start to look and find out a bit of information. And I would say that although stress management helps you once you're in the perimenopause, I feel knowledge is probably your best port of call to begin with, because then from there you will be able to decide whether you need to go see your GP, whether you're going to go and absolutely explore complementary therapies. I've explored homeopathy, medical herbs, as well as other sort of, you know, diet and exercise, etc., etc.
Yeah. And for a man, what would be your best tip for a man?
A man who is with a woman who is going through the menopause, I would actually say talk about it.
Raise the fact that maybe she is a little bit touchy.
I don't know. I think that might be. I personally think
it's got to be done in the right way, obviously.
No, I think it's about listening, actually. Maybe it's not about the talking, it's about the listening. Listen to the words that she uses if she's trying to describe how she's feeling. If she's all of a sudden experiencing something different that she's not spoken about before and she's trying to tell you, I would say listen out for it. Once you've listened about it, ask questions. I would say ask questions. Rather than say, oh yeah, I wondered why you're being such, so titchy, because that's possibly not the best way to go about it.
I think the thing as well, I mean, as I mentioned at some point in my book, it's not so much, I often say, yes, you can tell your wife a bum looks big in this. You can. It's how it's said. If you just say your bum look big in this, yes, obviously you're going to end up wearing something, on top of your head.
Black eye, I would think.
But if it's said in a way that is, do you know what? Actually, your white pair of whatever suits you better. It's not said in the same context at all, is it? It's hopeful, basically. And I think that's why, sometimes it's how you say things. So if obviously you went and said, do you know what, you're a bit touchy today, yeah, you're probably gonna, get it both barrels. But if it was said in a nice way, saying, are you okay, then it's a different outcome, isn't it?
Definitely. I would say if you've really noticed some changes happening, and I think this would be the same actually for men and for women who are witnessing another woman's
another man for that matter,
actually asking, is everything okay? You seem you're not your normal happy self, or something like that. I think if you come in from that point of view, then definitely it opens the door to communication. If you're frightened, if you're squeamish, if you think it's women's troubles and that they don't need to be talked about, then I'm afraid you're in the wrong century. You need to come full throttle into the 21st century, and you need to be able to talk about things like this so that it can actually bring you closer and you can support each other through it.
Okay. Well, on that lovely note, Louise, I'm going to say thank you, because we're reaching the end of our time together. So thanks for, your knowledge and your comments today.
Thank you very much.
And for everybody else, thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back next week. Thank you.